In this Unity tutorial I will show you how to make this FPS controller for your player and also a controller for the main camera so you can look around. So let's get started. So right here I have a very basic scene with a ground object and a main camera and a directional light. And to create the player we'll just right click and go to 3D object and choose a capsule. I will call it player and move it to 0, 0, 0 and then drag it a bit up so it's not in the ground. Then I'll attach the main camera to the player and set the position to 0, 0. Let's go a bit closer and then drag the main camera a bit up, like so. Then we'll click on our player again and add a rigid body. Then we'll right click in our assets and create a new C# script. We'll create a player, movement, and I'll call it FPS in the end. And we will also create another C# script called camera, controller, FPS. Now let's start off by opening the player movement script. In here we'll start off by adding a few variables. So we'll add a public float called move speed and I'll set it to 4. Then I'll add a public float called jump force, which I will set to 5. And a public layer mask called ground mask, which will be the layer for the ground so we can check if we've hit the ground so that we cannot jump in the air. Then I'll also add a private rigid body called RB and a private bool called isGrounded. And in our start function we'll set RB, so our rigid body, to get component rigid body, and we'll do RB.freeze rotation to be true so that our capsule don't fall over. Then in our update function we'll check if input.get button down, where we'll input jump, in this case this will be space, and isGrounded. Well then we can simply do RB.add force vector 3 up, so the up direction, times the jump force, comma, force mode dot impulse, because a jump is an impulse in this case. Then we'll create a fixed update function where we'll add a float h, which stands for horizontal, which we will set to input.getAxis, horizontal spelled exactly this way, and a float v for vertical, which we'll set to input.getAxis vertical. So for the horizontal that will be A and D, and the W will be for W and S. So W would be 1 and S would be -1. And up here A would be 1 and D would be -1. And when you don't press anything it will just be 0. Then we can create a vector 3 called move, which we can set to parentheses transform.forward times V plus transform.right times h, and we'll multiply all of this with move speed. Then we'll create another vector 3 called new velocity, which we will set to new vector 3 move.x, comma, rb.velocity linear velocity.y, comma, move.c. And then we can do rb.linear velocity equals new velocity. And lastly we need to set isGrounded, so we'll do isGrounded equals physics.raycast, and we'll input transform.position, comma, vector 3.down, comma, 1.1f, comma, ground mask. So this will basically be true when the raycast is hitting the ground, and it won't be true when the player is up in the air and the raycast won't hit the ground. So that's all for the player movement. Let's now go back into Unity and click on our camera controller. Here we'll start off by adding a public float called sensitivity, and I'll set that to 2. And then I'll add a private float called X rotation, and I'll set that to 0f. Then in the start function I'll simply do cursor.lockState equals cursor_lock_mode.locked. And then we'll also do cursor.visible equals false. So this one locks the cursor and this one hides the cursor. Then in our update function we'll do float mouse x equals input.getAxis, and in here we'll write mouse x spelled exactly this way, and we'll multiply this with sensitivity, and then we'll do almost the same here, but we'll just do y instead and y right here. Then down here we'll do x rotation minus equals mouse y, and we'll do x rotation again equals mathf.clamp x rotation, comma, -90f, comma, -90f. So this makes sure that we can't look more than 90 degrees down and 90 degrees up, so we don't like break our neck. Then lastly we'll do transform.local rotation equals quaternion.Euler x rotation, 0f, 0f. and transform .parent.rotate vector3.up times mouse x. So make sure that the parent of the camera is the player, so this will work properly. Now go back into Unity, click on our camera, and we'll drag the camera controller onto the camera. And we'll click on our player and drag the player movement script onto here. Then we need to set the ground mask, but right now we don't have a ground layer. So click on our ground, click up here and click add layer. And we'll add a layer called ground, like so. Then we'll click on our ground again and add the ground layer. Now we can click on the player, scroll down and set our ground mask to ground layer. Now let's click play and we can look around and we can jump and we can move around. So that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, please subscribe.